Why are all these cats so excited? They know it's Dostoevsky Day. Why are all these cats so excited? They know today's the day we talk Dostoevsky. Love Dostoevsky. Okay, I've been looking forward to this video, but also dreading it because there's just so much to talk about. I predict this video will be 9 hours long. That's a lot of books to look at. Okay, let's see. So this is the biography. This is the 1-volume version. Man, it's beat up. Of the 5-volume epic biography of Dostoevsky by Joseph Frank. I don't know, maybe he's American. It's Joseph Frank. So yeah, this is the 1-volume version of the 5-volume work by Frank. Wait, I wasn't filming. So this is the 1-volume version of the 5-volume masterwork. I doubt there's a better, broader biography of Dostoevsky than Frank's, at least not in English. Who knows, in Russian, untranslated, but I don't know, Dostoevsky is really just of interest. I once had a really vivid dream in which I learned that my friend Ty was the reincarnation of Dostoevsky and his wife was the reincarnation of Dostoevsky, one of Dostoevsky's great loves. And when I woke up, I was like, I can kind of see the resemblance. Dreams are wild. But I could see that. My friend's a pretty good writer. But once I got into this, so the project I came up with was to read this book, and anytime it got to one of Dostoevsky's works, I would read that. And so, like, early on I read this one, Poor Folk, his first novel. We'll look at that in depth in a second, because that is awesome to have. And so I thought I would just get this really broad, awesome view of all his works that way. And then whenever I would get to a novel, because he has 5 major novels, I would read the novel, then the notebooks, because he has the notebooks surviving of all of the novels, like the notes he made in the writing of them. And then I'd read that, really immerse myself in his process. And then I would read the novel again. And I'm learning, I've gone about halfway through his bibliography, and then the project kind of stalled and was kind of abandoned, but I'm going to reboot it for this channel. I'm going to do it again and be thorough with it, because I have a huge document called A Complete Dostoevsky on my laptop, where I've written notes up for lots of his works. But, you know, reading projects are hard because you want to read lots of stuff, but no, it's like you just got to stay committed to this one thing. But I will finish it because I just want this author to have any kind of influence that's possible on me. Like, I want to be, I mean, I don't want to get addicted to roulette, but once I really got into this biography, I wanted to get all the individual volumes of it. And here's one of them. This is the only one I own of the unabridged form. What is up with this? They bound it in like saran wrap or something. It's not aged well. But also, I think I kept this in a backpack a little too roughly. I think I was most of the way through this one, The Miraculous Years. What volume is this? Anyway. Yeah, it's a great biography with great analysis of the work as it goes. I don't know, I'm just going to start going through this pile because I'm like daunted by this. Here's a beautiful copy of his first novel. Hard to find it as a standalone. Hardback with a dust jacket. I think this might be an official USSR publication. I've seen little books like this. Foreign Languages Publishing House, Moscow. Wow. This is an epistolary novel, but it broke the epistolary novel away from the rich to very poor people worried about money. Hashtag relatable. Yeah, cool. Check that out. Printed in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Awesome. Love that. Yeah, here's a Chekhov book with a similar printing history. Printed in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Wow, what an artifact. Oh, this book is so cool. I always thought it would pair really well with his book, The Gambler. And then I recently saw them both in a collection because they're both his like autofiction. This one about when he was imprisoned in Siberia. It was really the turning point of his life and his career and his authorial voice. Very interesting. Here's what he read when he was in Siberia: the New Testament and David Copperfield by Charles Dickens in translation. And that is so interesting to me because that tells me so much about Dostoevsky, his influences and the voices that helped shape him. He also grew up on fairy tales and bandit tales of the Volga River. And Gogol was a big early influence on him, as were French writers like Balzac and like proto-psychology stuff like, what's that one guy? Nobody knows. Turns out that's been lost history. All right. At least my brain's history. But this book is amazing. It has so many memorable scenes in it. It has scenes that are just like hell in it. When all the convicts, shackled and chained together, go to the sauna, and the air is just grimy with black filth, and like, oh, it's so disgusting. It makes me gag just like recalling that scene. Or just sad things like this bird with a broken wing that was stuck in the enclosure with them, and it would just walk around the perimeter. This hawk, fascinating. Or the sad fate of any animal that came into the camp, basically. And just how Dostoevsky was never accepted because he was like this educated person. He probably had some judgments about the commoners, but you won't usually see in his work like glowing paeans of ignorant people. Though he does have every kind of character. He's a fascinating writer, and he's not afraid of the dark. Love this book. This book really is nonfiction, but he makes the character a murderer instead of part of a Free the Serfs leaflet printing circle, which is what he was. Petrushevsky Circle. This is a really interesting book about Dostoevsky, kind of turning him into a character. There's a few like that. One of which I got rid of. This, what's that South African writer's name? I don't know if I kept any of his books. He wrote a whole book about Dostoevsky's non-existent stepson, and I'm like, why do historical fiction and just make up such a key thing? Like, lazy. I don't even want to read that. I got rid of it. I don't want to confuse myself into thinking Dostoevsky had a stepson or something in the way that the book presents it. But this book has really long sentences. Every chapter is a sentence. Enid Sipkin. Apparently it had to be smuggled out of the USSR at the time. I don't know why. I had this when I was young, and it's marked up with ink, and I want to slap myself around a little bit, my younger self. You fool. You young fool. If I ever suddenly have a memory of a hand reaching through a portal and slapping my younger self, I'll understand. Sometime in the future, I figure it out. But this is about one of Dostoevsky's gambling sprees on his honeymoon. Dude had a serious gambling addiction. Just to roulette. His book, The Gambler, really captures that. It's a great book. So this is such a famous work of Dostoevsky's. It's Notes from the Underground. It's from earlier in his career, and he's like kind of being a little edgelord with this one. Whoa, I'm going to write a character who's so bad. I don't know. It's a fascinating book, and it's a portrait of someone who's just awful. And it's hurt people hurt, personified. It's a beautiful edition. I like it. I respect it. Oh, here's the thing with Notes from the Underground, why I don't think it's as good as it could be. It's got to be missing parts. It's missing parts. There are just gaps in it that don't make any sense. And I read an introduction to one edition that said as much, basically. That there's definitely parts that were excised for whatever reason. And they probably would have, I think they would have really helped, honestly. Because some of his actions feel abrupt and out of character. It's just this sort of like weasel of a man, this rat, slinking among the shadows and just hating everybody for being a part of life when he's not. And he's, to me, the nadir of his behaviors and attitudes, and there's a few things. He just wants to make everyone suffer around him, but the worst thing he ever does is really build up this prostitute when he's talking to her and then knock her down just sadistically. He's just a psycho. And I think Dostoevsky would do this thing when he wrote where he peeled off aspects of himself, and this is his absolute worst self. And Leo Tolstoy called him the most evil man he ever met when he met him. I doubt it. Dostoevsky was very high-minded. But he was able to explore the depths in a way that Tolstoy maybe wasn't always. I'm a little biased. I like Tolstoy too. There's someone I like better. Poor Folk and Other Stories. Okay. So this might have some short stories in it. Yeah, The Landlady, Mr. Prokharchin. You can find any of these read as audiobooks on YouTube. Here's a critical book about him. Hey, this is kind of fun, just going out of order. Have I read this? Yeah, I read it. I got this from a free pile when I was an undergraduate in college. Back when free piles were not common like they are now. Little free libraries. Back in my day, you had to walk miles to get a free book. Who were you talking to, Grandpa? Here's probably one of the most famous Dostoevsky fans, Elif Batuman. Obsessed. Adventures with Russian Books and the People Who Read Them. She was like NPR famous for a while because of this, and like Lit World famous, and wrote a bunch of follow-ups, and has other books that are also quite liked. These reviews say it's funny. Possessed. Well, it obviously takes its title from Dostoevsky. The Possessed, aka Demons. Weird when books have different translated titles. Oh, I love this book so much. This is Dostoevsky's great unfinished work, The Touchka Nezvanova. It's an early career one, and I love it. It's so good. I've read it at least twice, probably 3 times, and every single time the tragedy that it's unfinished hits me. It's such a ripoff when you get to the end every time. It's a beautiful book. It's like you can tell he was going to do something Karamazzovian in scope. I mean, you get a lot of setup with her dad, I think, if I recall correctly, and you're just getting the whole world, and you really get to. This has been adapted into movies in ways before. I remember reading online. Like, there's enough there for a full story, depending on where you end it, but it feels very incomplete the way it is. This is an excerpt from the Brothers Karamazov, the Grand Inquisitor, a famous excerpt, where Ivan Karamazov is going off with this parable about the power that the devil offered Jesus and Jesus turned down was then offered to the Catholic Church, and they accepted it. Or to the church. I guess it would be the Russian Orthodox Church in their world. The Christian Church. Oh, this book is so cool. This is one I had to track down and buy online via eBay or thrift books. Look at this thing. Letters of Fyodor Dostoevsky. Letters. Oh, I love old books. Kind of looks like my childhood friend James Smith, too. So, 1961. Honestly, it felt older to me, but that's interesting. Oh, I'm excited to read this one. I've not read this. Yeah. Just all yelling at dry cleaners or something. See, he talks about a work maturing in his brain for years. That's cool. Oh, he wants to write a book as long as War and Peace. Might be talking Karamazov here, I wonder. Yep. Here's his notebooks for the Brothers Karamazov. He had such good handwriting. Makes sure to develop calligraphy. And he would doodle on his drawings. Sometimes his notebooks from like Karamazov or whatever will get put online as like, look at his drafts of stuff. What a mess. And it's not. They're not drafts. They're his notebook notes. Awesome. I haven't read this one yet, but I have read some of the other notes. This is a really interesting, this is Dostoevsky as a travel writer. Winter Notes on Summer Impressions. A series of writings on traveling around Europe. And he's a pretty funny host for such a thing because he's a cantankerous, like, Russian patriot who's mad at all his friends that live abroad now, but he needs money from them. And I mean, but there's like sadnesses that happen. His wife, when something happens, their baby dies. Yeah. And I read this, but we'll reread it when I reboot this project soon-ish, ASAP. I remember some really interesting scenes of like extreme begging and poverty across Europe. And I'm like, dang, that sounds awful. You really saw a lot of like squalor and sadness and societal failure. Okay, this is a prized possession. Diary of a Writer, Volume 1. I think I have both volumes. He had this column. I think this is where he reveals some of his right-leaning political tendencies at times. Okay, some interesting notes here. 1949, Christmas 1949, when it was a brand new book. Oh, wow. This is not his diary, but a column he had that was called The Diary of a Writer, I think, something like that. Marginalia from 1949. Maybe from before your parents were born. That's crazy. Crime and Punishment. Oh, it's got the alternate spelling. Fyodor. Yeah, I have all sorts of different editions of Crime and Punishment, and really all the major novels, because you get different commentary, different translations, blah, blah, blah. Unsightly Stain. Okay, this is an obscurity that I own. Stavrogin's Confession. This is an excerpt that was deleted from his book, the book The Possessed. And it's basically like a crime of pedophilia committed by one of the major characters. And I think Freud wrote the introduction to this. Look at that, translated by Virginia Woolf. That's fantastic. And S.S. Kotiliansky, I forgot about that. The Psychoanalytic Study of the Author by Sigmund Freud. You know, they used to know how to do a good edition. That's great. Maybe they still do, and I'm just missing it. But what a confluence of personalities here. 1947. Yeah, it's interesting to read. I think Dostoevsky himself has been accused of, like, why did he write about that, you know? Did he really do something like that? I don't think he did. I don't think he was not like that. But when he was really young, he basically lived on the grounds of a hospital because his dad was a doctor, and his best friend was a little girl, and a soldier did something really horrible to her, just a horrifying assault, and and killed her. And so, like, he grew up with, like, that crime in his mind as this, like, ultimate evil. That's where that comes from when he's writing, not some historical thing, you know? Everyone just wants to smear the greats, you know? And I think Dostoevsky was actually the person that we think he was, that comes through in his writing. To me, he has an undeniable selfhood, you know? Like, you feel who Dostoevsky is from reading his work. And, you know, I think he had a strong sense of justice and righteousness. When he's writing negative and dark characters and so on, it's like, I don't know. There's something like Jesus-like or something in his love of all humanity. Okay, we're jumping around here, but sorry, it's a big pile of books. This was his unfinished book that he never got to. It's just his notes. It also has Stavrogin's Confession that we just looked at, so I guess I have 2 copies of that. The Plan of the Life of a Great Sinner. Yeah, I have this just because it's like his notes for an unfinished work. Yeah, I remember this being kind of a difficult, challenging read, just because it's just loose notes. But I was glad I read it. And I guess I'll read it again and go through everything. I read it because it was part of... I did read it. It doesn't seem like I would have gotten to this yet. It had some earlier text in it or something. Here's a Writer's Diary, Volume 2, so I have both of those. But this is a more modern paperback edition. But he has some good insights here and there, and regardless, it'd be interesting just to hear his voice in that way. This I've read from a lot, the short stories of Dostoevsky. He has some great short stories, and some that are like just experiments. There's an interesting old, very Freudian biography of him, 3 Loves of Dostoevsky. I remember reading this. Freud considered Dostoevsky second only to Shakespeare. He wrote about him a bit. Said he was the writer of psychology. Crime and Punishment Cliff Notes. Handy. Ooh, I gotta say, I like them even better than Cliff Notes. Monarch Notes, Brothers Karamazov, a little more robust. Old ephemera. Oh, I thought this was cool. The Idiot. Monarch Notes to the Idiot. Came across this in a free box or a thrift store. But then I was like, oh, it's from Sandia High School. That's funny. I've substituted out there many times. The book must be returned before the first class on the following school day. Overnight book. Huh. The Idiot is such an interesting book by him because it takes Dostoevsky's best self. It's kind of the anti-Notes from the Underground, which takes his worst self, takes his best self and makes it a main character. And the main character is kind of stupid and plagued by seizures and health problems. Dostoevsky did develop seizures after Siberia and had pretty debilitating ones. It affected his life and employment. And he probably had them earlier too. I don't know. Perhaps they were a part of his genius. I'd like to think so, since I had seizures as a kid. Hey, can I get some of that genius from that? Not just health problems. Got the Y in the name there. It's old-timey. This is a fascinating book here, The Double. But there's two versions of The Double, and they're both in this book. And so you can see how a writer of Dostoevsky's stature and ability grew over like major time. What did he think was better? In the second version, more telling. I remember that. Longer sentences, more detail, more short sentences connected as long sentences. I'm like, okay, why are these things good? Well, they're good because they add lyricism, and they're good because they dispense with not giving you the information you need, and telling can be showing. And anyway, The Double's a fascinating doppelganger story. Somebody goes to work and finds himself basically replaced. There was a recent modernized movie of it, but I swear it felt more like a Kafka story than a Dostoevsky story. Or David Cronenberg doing William Burroughs. I mean, Naked Lunch type vibes. I need to rewatch it, give it another chance. But it deviated so much from the source material. I'm like, you know what? You missed out from someone having some of the greatest dialogue ever written. You know, novelistic, sure, but like amazing. That would have been great on screen. I'll give it another try, the movie. But most of Dostoevsky has been adapted in this or that way. That's cool. Oh, here's the notebooks for the Idiot. This was fascinating. I really enjoyed reading this. He was hounded by creditors all across Europe, fleeing creditors in Russia, destroying what little money he did get through gambling, or getting rid of it. And meanwhile, his wife is just being dragged along on it all, and they have a kid that dies, and it's heavy stuff. But so as a result, The Idiot is written as the most, like, from Dostoevsky's id, like stream of consciousness, as anything he ever wrote. It has this great polished setup, but then every chapter is written like on the run. And so if you read his biography alongside his work, you realize a lot of this book is wish fulfillment of things turning out differently. Like one time he proposed to a young woman who rejected him, and there's an identical scenario in The Idiot where, of course, she accepts him. And but The Idiot is great. I always rank his major novels: Karamazov, Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, 1, 2, 3, in the order of my love for them. There's so many levels to The Idiot, but it's just like I really enjoy it as part of a larger biography and identity of Dostoevsky too. Yeah, this is the notebooks. Here's the notebooks for Crime and Punishment. Now, this is fascinating. You could make a movie of how Crime and Punishment was written. What? Yeah, sure, why not? It's so fascinating. I mean, one of the things that gives Crime and Punishment its power is that you're like right behind the eyes of this murderer, but it's written in the third person. And you have all his thoughts in such detail. I remember when I first read that book, I was like, I've never read anything like this where you follow someone's thoughts so closely. And this guy's a murderer. And you're like right behind his eyes. But these notebooks reveal why that book has such power. It was originally written in the first person and then just switched over when the first person didn't quite work. I think because Dostoevsky needed Raskolnikov to be ignorant of something at some point in the book. So he's like, I'm going to try third person. And it's just like, that's where the magic was. Switch that close first person over to third person, so it's barely third person. It's like pure free and direct discourse. You're right behind his eyes. Just one of the brilliant innovations in that book and how it was written. And these notebooks are fascinating. Love Dostoevsky. And I love Crime and Punishment, and I loved knowing this. Yeah, so I read Crime and Punishment, then I read this, then I read it again, and I'm like, amazing. And I had just read about it in that biography from Joseph Frank. Great way to learn stuff. Okay. So late, in Dostoevsky scholar history, what is this from? 1975. This huge cache of Dostoevsky private diaries and notebooks was released. And then it was translated in 3 volumes, and I only have one of the volumes. So I put off reading these in their correct place in the timeline. I mean, I'm rebooting, but because it just doesn't fit neatly into it. But interesting, the unpublished Dostoevsky. I want to get both other volumes of this. They're out of print, sadly. You can be the most famous writer in the world. Dostoevsky's pretty famous, I guess, as writers go. And your stuff still goes out of print. It's crazy. Here's his notebooks for a raw youth. Definitely one of his least known, maybe his lowest ranked major novel. Late career. Well, not that late. Later, pre-Karamazov, I think. I honestly can't remember. But it was the last book I ever found of Dostoevsky's. It's also translated as The Adolescent or A Raw Youth. I think A Raw Youth is a better title. It's the 4th of his 5 great major novels. Written in 1874, 19-year-old searching for identity. I remember reading it when I wasn't that much older than that. It took me forever to find it even. It was obscure. Interlibrary loans didn't used to exist in the way they do now. Or I didn't think of them. Here's the notebooks for that. Seems pretty extensive. Nice library edition. Love that. And they wrap it in plastic. Love it. There's still a lot of Dostoevsky left here. Okay, this one's not exactly Dostoevsky, but it's a biography of the fictionalized priest that's in Father Zosima, that's in The Brothers Karamazov. So I tracked this down. And Starets Amphrosi. Wow, look at this little essayistic work. When is this from? Barnes & Noble. But it's got an old vibe to it. Oh, really old. Look at that. Unwin Books, Barnes & Noble. 1961. Also has this famous speech he gave about Pushkin, the writer. He loved Pushkin. Oh, this is one of the smallest books I own. The Gentle Spirit. Just one of his short stories. Published as a Penguin classic. Penguin 60s classics, 1860s. That's cool. Man lays bare his tormented soul. Tortured soul. Love stuff like this. Yeah, I used to have The Dead like this. And there's maybe 1 or 2 more around here. Short stories. An Honest Thief. Constance Garnett. We wouldn't even know who Dostoevsky is without her, really. The novels. Brothers Karamazov, The Idiot, The Possessed, Crime and Punishment, House of the Dead, The Insult and Injured, A Raw Youth, The Eternal Husband, The Gambler and Other Stories, White Knights, and Honest Thief. For the Family. I have read all of those many times. I love all these books. I love The Friend of the Family. That is so great. That's Dostoevsky's take on Moliere's Tartuffe, about a guest that comes to a house and never leaves. He wrote it right after getting out of Siberia when he was doing this military conscription in Siberia still. And it's one of 2 books he wrote around that time. The other was The Insulted and the Injured. And that's really interesting too. It's his most Dickensian, and it has a child as one of the major characters. And he shows, he's really good at writing kids. Dostoevsky. Here's A Friend of the Family. This is a hard book to track down a standalone copy of. I had to go old to even find this one, I think. Friend of the Family. I love it. This is a hilarious book. It's funny. Dostoevsky could get good laughs. Oh, wow. Wouldn't I love to own that whole set? The novels of Fyodor Dostoevsky, Volume 12. I bet this was a beautiful set to see it all. Friend of the Family. If any of you own it and would just like to send it to me, that's cool. 1928. 23. Jeez. Whoa. Why is this not an easier to find book? I remember this was the only copy of this I could find as a standalone. It's often anthologized or collected. I love it though. It's so good. It's so funny. There's this one scene where this guy keeps getting mad at this little boy who's like a servant in the household for always dreaming about a white bull, for having pedestrian dreams, basically. Stop dreaming about a white bull. It's really funny. And how he stays at this house is hilarious. It's a great premise. This is a famous biography of him, his life and work. I think I read this a long time ago. Ugh, I'm marked up. Come on. Look, I did it all three sides. Why? That's vindictive. What book hurt you? Are you taking it out on other books? Oh my gosh. I know exactly where this is from. They're from the book stop. Why did they do that? It's this little crazy cavern bookstore next to UNM. It's just like a room full of books, basically. You wander around amidst the piles. But why would they do that? I don't know. Maybe that was from another store. Or 3 different stores. I would have displayed this in my house had I wanted my children to grow up afraid of Dostoevsky. Jeez, what's going on here? Excited babies. From Avram Yarmolinsky. His central interest has been Fyodor Dostoevsky. Oh, cool. Bethel, Connecticut. I've never been there. Dostoevsky the Convict, from a sculpture by S.T. Konenkan. 1971. He also wrote a book about Turgenev. The man, his art, his age. Cool. Editor the works of Pushkin, Chekhov. Russians over 2 centuries. Cool. Rebellion. Crime and Punishment is so good. So good. This is where the TV show Columbo comes from, you might not know. The detective in this, Pyotr Pyotrovich, directly inspired the character of Columbo. Raskolnikov is such a great central figure. You never forget Raskolnikov if you've read this. He's a murderer who can't handle the weight of his own crimes. Don't steal this idea, but it's a great idea. You know how Tom Stoppard did Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead about minor characters from Hamlet? Well, I want to rewrite like a modern take on Crime and Punishment, and it'll be called Razumikin and Dunya Are Alive, and it'll be about their romance. Because what's a really interesting counterpoint element of Crime and Punishment is that his sister is falling in love with his best friend like the whole time, while he is worried about being caught for a double homicide. So the double homicide is always first and foremost in the foreground because you're so close to Raskolnikov. Meanwhile, the thing with his sister and best friend, who's really a great friend and is like helping him, he just thinks he's sick and like having existential problems. He doesn't realize why Raskolnikov is so crippled by his feelings. He did this unforgivable thing. Dostoevsky is such an expert writer. There's a character in here, Svidrigailov, who he represents the worst of Raskolnikov. Maybe Razumikin represents the best. Dunya represents this like alternate version of him, his sister. Things are always moving in opposition to each other. When the person who represents the worst of him kills himself, that's when Raskolnikov is also finally getting absolution. There's a scene where, it's Sonia that represents the best of him. She is working as a prostitute to support her extended family. She's very religious, and the scene where she's in one hotel room and only a paper-thin wall separates her from Svidrigailov, who represents Raskolnikov's bad self. So you have like these two characters forming like the hemispheres of this other character. It's so fascinating. Dostoevsky's such a good writer. But anyway, my riff on it, Razumikin and Dunya Are Alive, would center their story and make it like a rom-com, and just the Raskolnikov stuff would be like a weird thread going on in the background, kind of driving the plot a bit. Anyway, it's a great idea. I'm definitely going to write that. I've already got the notes written out for it. Don't steal it. I love that Einstein quote where someone's like, stop telling everyone all your ideas at parties. Some grad student's going to make a career out of it. He's all, I'll have other ideas. That's a good, healthy attitude. But still, don't steal people's ideas. Come on. If you want to see that book exist, just, ask me to write it. Oh, the Brothers Karamazov. Oh, here's a nice edition. It's kind of modern. It's all right. I'm glad, good for you, Barnes & Noble, keeping the classics in print. Just they don't always credit their translators well. Look at this funny thing from when my oldest kids must have been really young. Anodyne is my daughter and Hagen is my son. Dear Valentine Hagen, I love you, Hagen. You're a lovely sister, Anodyne. Must have been like 4 and 2 or something, because that's not Anodyne's handwriting. 5 and 3, so how funny. That's so funny that was in there. I'm gonna send that to my kids. I'm happy my kids all turned out friends with each other. Here's The Gambler. This is such a good book. And again, one of his truest novels. The Gambler and House of the Dead really should be read together. I mean, they're just 2 slices of real life, thinly fictionalized, but you can see Dostoevsky behind them both. Good book, too, with larger-than-life characters. With the Diary of Polina Soslova. Oh, yeah, that's part of the story. Yep. It's good. There's a lot here that's like, here's why you love Dostoevsky. You can hear his pretty cosmic, far-out notions on gambling and willing luck and all this stuff. It's awesome. He was really just into roulette, though. Like, that was it. That was the one game he wanted to play. Roulette. A biopic about Dostoevsky that uses The Gambler and House of the Dead as its 2 storylines and like they thematically mirror each other and they interweave. Oh, I got a new Dostoevsky idea I want to do now. But it's Fyodor. He would be the main character. Turn it back to him. I definitely have some Dostoevsky-related projects I like to do. I'd like to do that one, Razumikin and Dunya in Love. I'd like to do a version of Richard Linklater's Slacker, basically, but moving around in St. Petersburg in the 1860s, and you just have all these encounters with different Dostoevsky characters doing scenes. I think that'd be fun. He's an inspiration to me, and I like any time spent with him and getting to know his work in any way. And I want to keep him alive in my fandom, Here's a nice copy of The Idiot, a library copy. Had this for a long time. Man, I love when people used to illustrate books for adults. Yeah, no one ever quit liking pictures. You can keep doing that. The Idiot by Dostoevsky. I definitely had times sitting around reading this where I felt like, this is me, I'm the idiot. Sometimes it feels both ironic and fitting to read this book. Maybe you're one of those people that's only ever made good decisions, so that must be nice. So Notes from the Underground. Now we're to the paperbacks. 3 short novels of Dostoevsky. Oh, these are all good. The Double, Notes from the Underground, The Eternal Husband. What do I remember about The Eternal Husband? Not much. Beautiful, The Devils. Look at that. AKA The Possessed, AKA Demons. 1962. Penguin Classic. This is a good one. This has Dostoevsky's highest body count for any of his books. People die all the time. It's got a cool cell of nihilists, and if you have 4, they have to kill the 3 have to kill the 4th to bind them together. We are nihilists. This would probably pair well with Turgenev's Fathers and Sons. 2 works about nihilists from different perspectives. I bet Turgenev's is a little more understanding, maybe? No, Dostoevsky writes his darker characters well. He had those aspects in himself. There's another one that's tricky to track down. One of his immediately post-Siberia works. Different than any of his other books, and really good. It's one I mentioned that has a kid in it. The Insulted and Injured. Very Dickensian. The Russian master's classic story of selfless love pitted against licentious evil. Elements from this were adapted in a movie by Kurosawa. Cool. A quote from one of those biographers we just looked at. An unusual version of the eternal triangle, the contrast between the love that seeketh not itself to please, and the lust of the man who knows no law but that of his own appetite. Yeah, Dostoevsky really wrestled with his conscience. Glad I own this one. Notes for Crime and Punishment. It's nice. They made it a nice little paperback with a good spine. Love it. Rescued this from a middle school free pile. No one was reading it. Great short works of Dostoevsky. I think this has 1 or 2 things I can't find elsewhere. White Nights is one of his most adapted, maybe the most adapted thing he's written. It's kind of an unrequited little love story, a friendship, sort of before sunset, after whatever type thing. couple hanging out, a meaningful emotional connection. The Dream of a Ridiculous Man, that's that same as that Dream of a Queer Fellow that we saw, just translated with a different title. That often happens with his pretty little edition of Crime and Punishment. Oh, and how could I forget the Crime and Punishment project Dostoevsky project I've been working on most recently was Crime and Punishment in Albuquerque. I made all these posters up for it. It's a gender-flipped, modernized version set entirely in the concrete arroyos and interstitial alleyways of the northeast heights of Albuquerque, and filmed entirely on phones using friends playing roles and things rewritten, like the mom in there, Sonia's mom with all her babies. We made her an insane person who just had a bunch of dolls instead, because we have a lot of dolls. We don't have a lot of little kids for the act. So that's like a great change. And then Raskolnikov is a young woman skateboarding everywhere. But I wrote most of the script for that, and I was using this copy, adapting from it. I was trying to stay really true. I gave myself a couple parameters to help in the writing of it. One, I cut all dreams. Like, you can see the person waking up from it or having it, but you won't see the dream itself, because that got rid of a lot. I also cut all long dialogue passages because I just am using non-actors for these roles, and we'll have to trust the cinematic medium a little bit. But then we were dealing with the fallout from our house being shot up and everything, all this crazy stuff that happened, and so that kind of Crime and Punishment in Albuquerque became too literal, my life. I will get back to that. Some of the posters for it I made look really cool. And my daughter is always down, I think. She'll be a great Raskolnikov. And last but not least, the Crime and Punishment copy I probably first read forever ago. This might be the same one I had in Alaska. It's certainly identical. And canoeing on Lake Powell and just traveling around. I've read this book so many times. I love it. I bet I've read this book 10 times. It's so good. Crime and Punishment. You know, Dostoevsky's awesome, y'all. He's great. He's a part of my life, you know. He's just fantastic. Just as the theme song of Gumby says that if you have a heart, then Gumby can be a part of you, I feel the same way about Dostoevsky, you know. Let this man's amazing writing into your life and find yourself enriched and your life better, you know. He's just great. I never get bored of learning about him. I never get bored of reading him. If I could find a bumper sticker that said, I'd rather be reading Dostoevsky, I would get it, because it would be 100% true for me a lot of the times in my life. I remember reading somebody who wasn't Dostoevsky once, and I just felt distinctly the thought, I thought it in words, I wish I was reading Dostoevsky instead. Like, he's just my favorite. It took me a long time to realize he was my favorite. He was first introduced to me by my then brother-in-law, Philip White, the great poet. And he told me that his favorite book was The Brothers Karamazov, and I was young and impressionable and didn't know what to read. So I read that when I was like 18, I think, for the first time, maybe 17. And I was like, this is incredible. I really liked it. I liked how the characters were they were really interesting, and it's good. But yeah, the names were a little confusing. The shelves cry out for their books.